Welcome to We've All Done It, the podcast for leaders who get the work done, but find the people part of leading frustrating. I'm Kimberly Benoit, author, award-winning former corporate executive, and leadership coach. With over 20 years in the corporate world, I've seen it all, the good, the bad, and the downright messy. If you've ever avoided a tough conversation, played favorites without realizing it, or just wondered, why is leading people so hard? You're in the right place because we've all done it. This is your space for real talk, real solutions, and no judgment. Together, I'll share practical strategies to help you navigate workplace drama, build stronger teams, and lead with confidence. No more pretending, no more suffering in silence, just honest, actionable leadership from someone who's been in your shoes. Are you ready to lead differently? Let's do this. Welcome back, everybody. I want you to picture this. You are about to have that difficult conversation that you've been putting off for weeks. Your heart races, your palms are sweaty, and suddenly all of those leadership trainings you've been sitting in are starting to feel kind of useless. Sound familiar? Well, today we're going to talk about why knowing what to do and actually doing it are two completely different things and how to bridge that gap. So, I do leadership development. I am that person who is leading these trainings, right? And I have seen so many leaders come through with great intentions. They're reading the books, they're taking the classes, but yet they're struggling to actually apply it when the moment matters. You are not alone. That is most of us, because what we do is we go into these scenarios with great intention, but we never actually take the time to figure out how to build the muscle memory to impart these new skills. So, and then what ends up happening is when you have stress and pressure, we will absolutely default to old routines because that is what we know, that's what feels familiar. And so when you think about it, not just difficult conversations, but it could be, maybe you struggle with active listening and suddenly you went through the training, you've read the books, you've listened to the podcast, and despite that, you're still interrupting. Or maybe you struggle with boundary setting and you still find yourself saying yes to everything. So let's be clear. There's a fix to this, but it's going to require some work on your part. And so we're going to break that down today. So stay with me, promise me. We're going to get you there. So before we get into what I want you to do, I want to share a little bit of science that comes behind why this will work if you actually do it. So when we say the term muscle memory, right, that doesn't just apply to riding a bike or knowing how to walk or all the different things that apply to physical muscle. It also applies to our mental muscle. So automatic responses are developed through repetition. If you're, I just want you to think about, are there some automatic responses today that you verbally say when people talk to you? How you automatically will say things. Well, it's the same thing. So when we are under pressure, whatever is currently embedded in our nervous system is what we are going to do. It is just there. Those neural pathways are built. And what we're having to do is we're going to figure out how to break those neural pathways and create new ones. And why this is so important for you is because when you think about leadership, no differently than trying to teach yourself a new sport or engage in a new hobby that may have something to do with you personally, leadership actually involves every person you deal with all day long. So your team. So if you're trying to lead by example, if you're one of those leaders that are like, I'm putting in the work, then we need to start showing them in how we actually do the work as well. So some areas that I want you to think about, because I'm going to give you a little challenge at the end. So some areas where it becomes really important to practice what we preach. I've already talked about like difficult conversations in high stress moments, boundary settings that may require split-second decisions, mindfulness when we are overwhelmed. And mindfulness can absolutely tie into boundary setting, right? Because when we are overwhelmed, we're going to probably just say yes to make that problem go away. And that is exactly the opposite of what we want to do. So we also want things like boundary setting and to feel natural and not forced. We want to get to a place where we can confidently move within each of these example scenarios so that it just feels like who we are and not who we're trying to be. So, as I said, there's some science behind this. So, repeated practice is what creates your neural pathways. When we are under stress, we are going to default to whatever is the strongest neural pathway. If you currently have a tendency to do things in a way that is not who you want to be, maybe it's kind of how you're showing up, but not who you want to be, then that's telling you what your strongest neural path is. And so why it is going to become so important to break it. And in order to create a new neural path is going to require intentional practice. You're going to have to repeat the new behavior you want to create, the new pattern, the new habit to replace the old habit. And you can do this. I promise you, it's possible. How do I know? Because I've done it. I still do it. There's a lot of this that I do every single day. And I promise you're going to talk through that. So what we're talking about here is focused practice. This is where we are carving out time, depending on what it is, whatever that challenge is for you, to begin to create the new habit. So I'm going to give you an example. We're going to talk about the difficult conversation one, because that is one I know virtually every leader I have worked with at any point in time has been bitten pretty hard by a difficult conversation that has gone off the rails. And if there's one area where every leader could use support, additional focus, I would say it is in approaching difficult conversations with confidence and with, a sense of urgency. Because usually when you're having a difficult conversation, it's not something you can sit on for a long period of time. It's something you got to get done. But if you're not feeling really confident about it, you're probably going to delay it, which only makes the situation worse. So let's figure out how to help you be confident in this example, right? So role playing is something that I think is incredibly important. I know works. I have done it when I'm preparing for a difficult conversation. I have done it. I do it with all my clients who have some kind of conversation that is coming up. And where the intention of this is again, going back to being intentional, is that if you know it's coming up, you set up the practice. You actually schedule time to practice. Maybe you do some test runs on your own, and then you actually you find a partner, a trusted colleague, a coach, mentor, whoever it is for you. You set aside time to actually practice the conversation. So what does that mean, right? Because I know it can feel really awkward. It can feel really uncomfortable. And I say that because those are the emotions I have felt when I'm practicing a difficult conversation. It feels really weird. It feels really awkward. My clients say the same thing too. But again, you've got to go back to why you're doing this. You're doing this so that when you show up for the real conversation, it's not the first time you're trying to think through what you want to say. But we're going to take it a step further than that. It's not even just what you want to say. It's where do you want to say it? Like, is this going to be an email? Is this going to be in a closed door office? Are there other people going to be in the room? So think about the actual setting of where you would want that conversation to take place. Can you create an environment that will actually support the nature of that conversation? So take it there first. The second thing I tell people to practice is, what is your opening statement? What's the first thing you're gonna say? Sounds simple until you actually do it. And I'm going to give you an example in a few minutes of a client that I worked with where this became really important. And then third, what I tell people to do is that you're checking for understanding. Because sometimes we get so excited and we're so in our head about what we're saying and what we're trying to say, and we're trying to read the room, that we lose sight of the words actually coming out of our mouth. So it becomes really important to always check for understanding. And then ultimately, after the conversation, did it go the way you thought it did? So again, we're going to put this in real life. I'm going to give you an example of a client of mine. And she was in a kind of a unique dilemma. She had a unique first name, and she had been with her boss for 2 years. And during one of our sessions, she said she had a problem that she really would like to talk through. And the issue is her boss had said her name wrong for 2 years. And she said, when we first met, I corrected her a couple of times, but it never stuck. And she said, eventually I just let it go. It wasn't that big of a deal. Well, they were about to do a joint presentation for the company. So it was going to be in front of a couple hundred people. And her fear is that her boss was going to say her name wrong. And two things were going to happen. One, people who actually knew what her name was, she was scared that it would make her boss look foolish. And then secondly, for people who didn't know her name, she thought then it would set off a weird situation where then they would get her name wrong. So it was one of these awkward things. She was very embarrassed. She was very worried about how to bring this up to her boss because it wasn't like it was a short amount of time. She'd been saying her name wrong for 2 years. So clearly we had some avoidance going on. We had there's a lot of things there we could dig into. But what I wanted to talk about is this was coming up. It was very important. And she wanted to think through, she wanted her boss to say her name correctly. End of story. And so that's when we decided I said, let's prepare. How do you want to have this conversation? Pretend I'm your boss. You know, do you want a special conversation about this? Do you want to bring it up in a one-on-one? And so she was like, nope, I think I can bring it up in a one-on-one. I was like, all right, when do you want to bring it up? Beginning, in, middle? Where in the conversation do you think this is important to have it? So that you can work it into that agenda of that time you have together. And so she ended up deciding she wanted to address it at the top of the meeting so that it didn't accidentally get bumped off the meeting if conversations ran over. And then I said, so how do you guys usually start your sessions? What is something your boss usually says when you guys have one-on-ones together? And she's like, she usually says something of like, so what do you want to cover today? And so I looked at her and I said, okay, what would you like to cover today? And she panicked. She looked at me like deer in headlights. And she looked at me and said, I don't know how do I start? Like, what should I say? And instead of telling her what I thought she should say, I said, well, what would you like to say? I said, let's pause for a second. Just say it. Like, what would you like to say? Don't try to massage it. Don't try to be like, just say the words out loud as you would wish you could without any fear or anything. And so she did. And then I said, okay, so now that you've gotten that out, I said, what would be the first thing that you would now like to say in response to what would you like to cover today? And the beauty of that is she ran through it and she gave me a statement. And then I waited till she paused and I said, okay, this is what I heard. Is this what you intended? First off, I asked, how did you feel about that? And did she feel good about it? Would she change it? And then I gave her the feedback of, this is what I heard you say. This is what I understood you were asking for. And she's like, no, I didn't like how I started. I didn't like this part. I didn't like this statement. Can I try it again? And we went through it, honestly, probably about 4 or 5 times before she felt like she had a strong opening statement, felt very comfortable with what she'd say in the middle, and how she wanted to end the conversation. And I can tell you right now, it went really well. It actually went incredibly well. And her boss was horrified because she really didn't realize she was saying it wrong. And she fessed up that in her head, she would always argue between 2 different ways of pronouncing her name. And she said, apparently, I've always chosen the wrong one. And she was incredibly apologetic. And they were able to resolve this before they did the presentation. But the message here that I want you to stick with is, 1, it was really uncomfortable. 2, she had to run through it probably a good 5 to 6 times from the beginning to the end before she felt good about what she was going to say. And she felt like what I interpreted, like how I heard the words coming from her, matched her intention. Here's what I want to ask of you. Okay, so we've had this little conversation. These are the things I want you to think about. Is I want you to pick one leadership skill you've been meaning to improve. So again, we've named a couple. I've named a couple so far. So it could difficult conversation, maybe boundary setting. It could be, active listening. It could be whatever whatever it is you are struggling with. I want you to pick it, and then I want you to commit to an intentional practice in this upcoming week. So if it's a difficult conversation, I want you to practice it on your own and then find somebody you trust and actually do a run through before you have the real conversation. I want you to be open to the feedback that comes back at you when you practice. Okay? So if we're talking about active listening, then I want you to set something on your calendar where you are going to be intentional. Like, so if you're going into a one-on-one or you're going into a meeting where you struggle with that, I want you to intentionally maybe put yourself a sticky note if that works for you. Send yourself a digital reminder of be active listening, whatever the words need to be for you. Then after that action, after the practice, check in with yourself. Did that go as you expected it to? Would you do something differently? How can you show up better next time? Right? So this is what it's all about. Is I want you to choose the skill, practice it, and then reflect on how well that went. So with that, y'all, I know leading is hard. I know life is hard. This has already been, checking in with you. Like, I feel like August is rip and roaring right now. So just remember, leadership isn't about always knowing the right thing to do. It is about training yourself to do the right thing as instinctually, as automatically as possible. So that when the pressure's on, you show up the way you want, the way you intend, the way you desire. I guarantee you, your future self will thank you for the practice you put in today. Plain and simple. All right, so if this resonated with you, I'd love to hear what skill you're practicing this week. Share it on socials and tag me, or send me an email. I would just love to know. And if you found this useful and you know that there's somebody out there who maybe needs to hear this message, please share it with them. I would love for this message to get out that it's okay to practice. It's okay to say you need practice. And lastly, the thing I mostly want you to remember is that you need to keep practicing. You need to keep growing. Your teams need it. You need it. You both deserve it. And also, the most important part is progress beats perfection every single time. Right? So until next time, everyone, take care. See you soon. I've got two things before I let you go. One, if you've ever gotten any value from the show, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps and absolutely makes my day. The second thing is if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with me, please shoot me an email at podcast@KimberlyJBenoit.com. I'd love to hear from you. All right, see you in the next episode.